The 1950s culture that shaped America. Step into the world of poodle skirts, drive-in movies, and the birth of rock and roll. This was 1950s America, when the American dream came packaged with a white picket fence. Behind those white picket fences lay the idealized nuclear family, dad at work, mom at home, and 2.5 children growing up in a world of unprecedented stability and structure. When it came to discipline, Dr. Benjamin Spock was the first pediatrician to study psychoanalysis. He wanted to understand children's needs and family dynamics. He advised parents to trust their instincts in parenting their children. His book, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care, became one of the best-selling books of all time. The 1950s also saw the rapid growth of suburbs, with developments like Levittown in New York offering affordable housing for returning veterans. Despite this idyllic family image, the birth of suburbs actually created a new phenomenon called suburban neurosis among housewives. Dr. Herbert Freudenberger identified increased cases of depression among women isolated in their homes while their husbands commuted to work and children attended school. Betty Friedan called this the problem that has no name in her 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, based on the experiences of women in the 1950s. Post-World War II economy boomed in America. The GI Bill provided education benefits to millions of veterans, creating a skilled workforce, while labor unions helped secure good wages and benefits for blue-collar workers. For the first time, the majority of Americans could consider themselves middle class. Many corporations flourished during this period. General Motors, Ford, General Electric, and other industrial giants expanded their operations. Aerospace companies like Boeing, Lockheed, and Douglas Aircraft received substantial government contracts during the Cold War. Consumer spending became a patriotic duty, with Americans encouraged to buy goods to keep the economy strong against the Soviet threat. The average yearly salary was $3,210 at the beginning of the decade and rose to $5,010 by 1959. A minimum wage job paid 75 cents an hour, while a job in a factory had an hourly wage of about $1.50. The price of a new home in the 50s cost between $8,000 and $12,000. A new car averaged was about $2,000, and gas was 30 cents a gallon. Television became a part of daily life throughout the 50s. At the beginning of the decade, only 9% of American homes owned a television. But by 1959, the number rose to 90%. The first credit card, the Diners Club card, was introduced in 1950. It was made of cardboard and was accepted at only 27 restaurants in New York City. By 1951, membership soared to 42,000 people, and the card was accepted at over 330 establishments. The founder, Frank McNamara, came up with the idea after forgetting his wallet at a business dinner and having to call his wife to bring him money. By the end of the decade, American Express and Bank of America, with their Bank AmeriCard, later known as Visa, had entered the market, fundamentally changing how Americans shopped. Television also changed American leisure and culture. Families rearranged their living rooms around the TV set. The TV dinner, introduced by Swanson in 1953, was designed specifically for eating while watching television. Television created the first celebrities who were invited into people's homes every week. Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and Ed Sullivan became household names. The most popular program of the decade was I Love Lucy, starring Lucille Ball. Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, and The Honeymooners were all popular programs. Adults also enjoyed shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Perry Mason, and The Lawrence Welk Show. Children were captivated by the adventures of Superman, Howdy Doody, The Mickey Mouse Club, and Captain Kangaroo. The 1950s saw two movie fads, 3D movies and drive-ins. Buona Devil started the 3D craze in 1952. Movie viewers wore special glasses made of cardboard and plastic, allowing the film to be seen in 3 dimensions. In the latter half of the decade, drive-in theaters became popular. Charlton Heston enthralled moviegoers with his performance as Moses in The Ten Commandments. This big-budget biblical epic became the highest-grossing film of the decade and was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. Alfred Hitchcock thrilled moviegoers with films like Dial M for Murder, Vertigo, and North by Northwest. Marilyn Monroe became a household name, and Audrey Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor captivated American audiences throughout this decade. James Dean was one of the iconic heartthrobs of the 50s, with roles in East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause. Marlon Brando became a sensation with A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. Science fiction films flourished during the decade, reflecting Cold War anxieties. Movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Thing from Another World used alien invasions as metaphors for communist threats. Giant monster movies like Them, featuring giant ants, and Godzilla were allegories about atomic weapons. In 1958, there were over 4,000 drive-in theaters across America, accounting for 25% of all U.S. movie screens. Drive-ins were nicknamed passion pits because they became popular date spots for teenagers looking for privacy. What many people don't realize is that these theaters helped create a secondary film industry. B-movies were produced specifically for drive-in audiences, including low-budget horror films, hot rod movies, and beach party films. In music, the most popular trend of the decade was the introduction of rock and roll. The new musical style created some of the most legendary performers of the 1950s, including Elvis Presley, known as the King of Rock and Roll, producing 12 #1 songs in the 50s. Rock and roll represented a revolutionary cultural shift in American music. Drawing from rhythm and blues, country, and gospel traditions, it created something entirely new. Cleveland disc jockey Alan Freed is credited with coining the term rock and roll as a euphemism for sexual intercourse, highlighting the music's rebellious nature. The new genre caused significant controversy. Many parents, religious leaders, and politicians viewed rock music as immoral and corrupting to youth. Some radio stations held record-burning events where rock records were destroyed. And when Elvis Presley appeared on television, cameras often filmed him only from the waist up because of concerns about his hip movements being too suggestive. While Elvis was the biggest star, other influential rock pioneers included Buddy Holly, whose innovative songwriting and use of the studio influenced generations of musicians; Chuck Berry, whose guitar work and lyrics about teenage life defined the genre; Little Richard, whose flamboyant performance style and powerful vocals broke barriers; and Fats Domino, whose New Orleans-influenced sound sold over 65 million records. Jazz evolved significantly during the decade. The complex bebop style gave way to cool jazz, pioneered by Miles Davis, whose 1959 album, Kind of Blue, remains the best-selling jazz album of all time. Meanwhile, Dave Brubeck experimented with unusual time signatures on Take 5. The iconic song, Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and His Comets, was actually released as a B-side to another single. It received little attention until it was featured in the opening credits of the film Blackboard Jungle in 1955, and making it the first rock and roll record to reach #1 on the Billboard charts. Another fascinating detail: Sun Records founder Sam Phillips once famously said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion. He found that person in Elvis Presley. But what's less known is that when Elvis first auditioned for Phillips in 1954, he was rejected. It was only when Phillips heard Elvis singing an impromptu blues song during a break that he recognized Elvis's potential. As for fashion, the 1950s brought distinctive fashion trends for both men and women. For men, the Madison Avenue look dominated and was named after the street where many advertising agencies were located. It featured tailored suits in dark colors, white shirts, narrow ties, and fedoras. The greaser look was popularized by Marlon Brando in The Wild One, when he wore a leather jacket, white t-shirt, and jeans with rolled cuffs. Women's fashion was heavily influenced by Christian Dior's New Look, featuring a cinched waist and full skirt that emphasized femininity. Tailored suits with pencil skirts were popular for business wear, and on the casual front, capri pants and pedal pushers were all the rage. Teenagers had their own style too, with girls wearing poodle skirts, bobby socks, and saddle shoes, and boys adopting the ducktail haircut. Food culture changed with the popularity of fast food. Starting in 1955, McDonald's expanded under Ray Kroc's leadership. Convenience foods like TV dinners, cake mixes, and canned goods also became popular time savers for busy homemakers. Car culture flourished with distinctive automobile designs featuring tail fins, chrome, and bold colors. By the end of the decade, American automakers were producing some of the largest and most powerful cars ever made. The distinctive poodle skirt that symbolized 1950s teenage fashion wasn't originally designed for teens. It was created in 1947 by Julie Lynn Charlot, a 25-year-old actress who needed a last-minute holiday outfit. She created a circle skirt with appliques. The design became popular with adult women first before being adopted by teenage girls. The poodle wasn't the only decoration. Scottish Terrier dogs, telephones, hot rod cars, and record players were also popular appliques. The 1950s is often remembered with nostalgia as a simpler, more innocent time in American history. However, beneath the prosperity and conformity of the decade, significant social changes were brewing. The civil rights movement gained momentum with the Montgomery bus boycott and the landmark Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, which declared school segregation unconstitutional. The Cold War with the Soviet Union shaped much of American politics and culture. The fear of communism led to Senator Joseph McCarthy's investigations and Hollywood blacklists. Despite the pressure to remain in domestic roles, by the end of the decade, about 40% of women worked outside the home, laying groundwork for the feminist movement of the 1960s. The 1950s, with its mixture of prosperity, conformity, underlying social tensions, and technological innovation, set the stage for the dramatic cultural and political changes that would follow in the 1960s. The 50s saw the first teenage generation to have their own music, fashion, and hangout spots distinct from their parents. The concept of teenagers itself was new. Before, there was no distinct transitional period between childhood and adulthood. The term teenager was cemented as a cultural category in the 1950s. If you enjoyed this deep dive into American culture, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What's your favorite 1950s memory? Or if you're too young to remember this golden age, what aspect of this lifestyle would you most like to experience? Leave a comment below, and stay tuned for our next exploration of the golden era of the 50s and 60s.